Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today here on Point of View. First hour, we're going to spend some time looking at what took place last night in West Virginia for the Democrats, and also in West Virginia and Nebraska for the Republicans, and looking ahead to next week, Oregon for the Republicans, Oregon and Kentucky for the Democrats. And I think it was no surprise, of course, that Donald Trump won, although if he had not done so well, it would have been something that might have changed everything. That is, Ted Cruz said that if he did well in Nebraska, he might re-enter the race. I didn't think that would happen. I don't think he did either. But now, of course, it makes it a foregone conclusion that he is the presumptive nominee. And in just a few minutes, I want to talk about some of the people that might be part of his cabinet. We had this conversation yesterday, and I had an open line, and I certainly will this first hour today have that again for some of you that did not have a chance to get through and would like to make some comments about whether you will or will not vote for Donald Trump. But I recognize there are some individuals that say it doesn't matter what he does, I'm not voting for him. Others say, well, I may not like him, but I think I probably have to because I'm concerned about, who he'll have in the cabinet, who will have on the Supreme Court, and I do believe that Donald Trump's picks might be at least a little better than Hillary Clinton's. You think? But there are a good number in the middle that are saying, well, I'm kind of wait and see. Paul Ryan fits in that category, and I know some of you do as well. We have a much better understanding of who might be part of a cabinet, who might even be his running mate. And so I'd like to see if that changes any minds as we get into some of that in just a minute. But let's focus on the Democrats at the moment, because this is the issue. Let's face the obvious. Hillary Clinton will be the nominee, even in light of the fact that Bernie Sanders defeated her last night in West Virginia. Not just a little bit. You look at the map, he won every single county. Now, again, it's proportional in this particular state, so even though she lost and he won, the bottom line is he will still not have enough delegates to actually be the nominee when they actually show up at the Democratic convention. But nevertheless, you've got to start saying that the optics, as we like to talk about here on the program, do not look well. He has won 10 of the last 15 primaries. Next week, he will win Oregon. I can say that with virtual certainty. I think he will win Kentucky, too, in light of what happened here in West Virginia. Then there's a break that next week, and then Washington. Pretty sure he's going to win Washington, too. And then we come to the last of our Super Tuesdays, and that's California, Montana, New Jersey, New Mexico, South Dakota. For our listeners out there, some of you have been waiting a long time to cast your vote, but this has been the first time where at least some of our listeners in places like Indiana or even North Carolina and other places, Illinois and Missouri, felt like they were casting a vote that meant something, and so that certainly has been very significant this year as well. But let me just quote a little bit from the Wall Street Journal to show you why this is not only having an impact on Hillary Clinton's campaign, but it might also have an impact on Donald Trump's campaign come the fall. Wall Street Journal says Bernie Sanders defeated frontrunner Hillary Clinton in West Virginia on Tuesday, regaining momentum and leaving some of Mrs. Clinton's backers uneasy that her path to the Democratic presidential nomination figures to be rocky to the end. One of her supporters, who is a New Hampshire state senator, actually said, I'm always uncomfortable when she loses. Every time Bernie Sanders presents himself and presents his story, more people start talking about him And then it goes on and on. Yes, it does. And so the polls right now suggest that, as I pointed out, that Bernie Sanders will win in Oregon next week and in Kentucky. I know he'll win in Oregon. I'm pretty sure he'll win in Kentucky in light of what we've seen here in West Virginia, demonstrating that a sizable wing of the party remains attracted to his populist message and isn't yet ready to coalesce behind Mrs. Clinton. The victories also tend to fuel Mr. Sanders' fundraising, giving him more money to air TV ads and prolong the fight. Now, let's get back into reality, of course. They say at this stage in the contest, the delegate math remains decisively in Mrs. Clinton's favor. She led Mr. Sanders by 290 pledged delegates heading into West Virginia. And, of course, she will get a few delegates, even though she lost in every single county. It's just amazing. Charleston, North Carolina, Morgantown, Huntington, all those, just amazing. Yeah, I mean, she lost in every one of them. But nevertheless, she will, because it's a proportional primary, still come out with some delegates. He had 51%, she had 35%. They called it instantaneously last night. And yet, this is back to the reality. Once you add in the super delegates, then it's really pretty much over. She has 2,228. You might not know this because we've used the Republican number all the time. You need 2,383, so 2,383. She needs to just pick up another 100 or so, and she is the nominee. So that's the issue. The only way Bernie Sanders could possibly become the nominee is if she stumbles even more so, or if there's a health reversal, or somehow the superdelegates say, see, she is such damaged goods that we're going to withdraw our pledge to Hillary Clinton and instead go to Bernie Sanders. And I don't see any of that really happening at all. So nevertheless, those are the issues in the Democratic side. And one of the things that's kind of intriguing about all of this is that Donald Trump, I don't read Donald Trump's tweets too often, but I found this one because it made the news. He said, Hillary Clinton's toast, Democrats had better get the B team off the bench. Trey Gowdy for Attorney General under President Trump. Now, again, he's just having some fun, but if he is seriously thinking about Trey Gowdy as the Attorney General, first of all, this is the individual that has been investigating Hillary Clinton in Benghazi. And, of course, you've had the investigation and the email scandals and all of the rest. And so this certainly gives us a little bit of an idea of who might be in the cabinet of Donald Trump. And in just a minute, I'm going to go through a little bit more of some speculation, because, after all, Donald Trump just the other day said that he would like to have Rudy Giuliani be part of a commission to examine the problem we have in America of undocumented Muslims coming into the United States. Some people have said that he may actually tap Rudy Giuliani, not just for a commission, but to actually be the Secretary of Homeland Security. These are obviously very different kinds of nominations to the cabinet than one would probably expect under a President Hillary Clinton. And it brings us back to the Quinnipiac poll that we mentioned yesterday. When you look at Florida, it's a virtual tie right now. Hillary Clinton 43%, Donald Trump 42%. And this was taken before the most recent loss, obviously, that just took place last night in West Virginia, and a couple of other losses that I think we can predict in Oregon and Kentucky. And then when you go to Pennsylvania, again, a dead heat, basically. Hillary Clinton 43%, Donald Trump 42%. And then when you go to a very important swing state, Ohio, actually Donald Trump 43% to Hillary Clinton 39%. That was enough for sure that unless there are some things that change dramatically, and they do, because these polls mean only a little bit in May. They mean a lot more in October and November. And, of course, the most important poll is on Election Day. But, again, enthusiasm is another part of that. And this is why some of the supporters of Hillary Clinton are so discouraged, because when Donald Trump has a rally, it is wall-to-wall people. There are people outside trying to get in. And, of course, there's even controversy out there in the streets. When Hillary Clinton does one, sometimes you can hear the crickets. And that's not good if you really need to begin to mobilize people for an election. So let's take a break. When we come back, I want to talk a little bit more about who Donald Trump might put in his cabinet. And I want to hear from you. Do you think that would make a difference in whether you'd vote for him, or would it make no difference at all? If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You may have noticed that some politicians and judges are no longer talking about the freedom of religion. They now promote the lower standard they call the freedom of worship. The difference is significant. Freedom of religion implies the freedom to express your religious values in the marketplace. Freedom of worship implies you only have that freedom inside your church. The case of Dr. Eric Walsh suggests that even the weaker freedom of worship standard is under attack. He holds both a medical degree and a doctorate in public health. He is an outstanding health director that President Obama even appointed to his Presidential Advisory Council on HIV/AIDS. After being interviewed by the state of Georgia Department of Public Health, he was offered the position of district health director. Dr. Walsh immediately accepted and made plans to move his family across the country from California to Georgia. But then the Georgia officials decided to check into what he had been teaching at his church. They requested copies of his sermons and searched online for others. The Department of Public Health then decided to rescind the offer that Dr. Walsh had already accepted. Now, it's worth noting that the behavior of the department in reviewing the sermons was so egregious that its own counsel twice warned that under federal law, Dr. Walsh's religious beliefs could play no role in any employment decision. Nevertheless, they withdrew the offer and have marked him as a controversial person. First Liberty attorney Jeremy Dice explains that no one in this country should be fired from their job for something that was said in a church or from a pulpit during a sermon. Fox commentator Todd Starnes warns that what you say from the pulpit on Sunday could get you fired from the public sector job on Monday. This case illustrates that not only is freedom of religion under attack, but even the concept of freedom of worship is under attack. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
I'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We'll take some phone calls in just a minute. Let me just mention I've posted a couple of articles here, one on transgender activism, which we might get to a little bit later. Ed Whalen has written that piece, and also one on the liberal elite. Also want to add one that I didn't put up there, but certainly you can find, how Congress can stand with North Carolina and gender sanity. So we'll get to that a little bit later. But since we yesterday spent a little bit of time talking about the campaign, one of the questions I certainly know is on many people's minds is if I indeed think about voting for Donald Trump, with all the negatives, and we can make the long list, we all know the list, are there at least individuals that would be in his cabinet that would be preferable to what we suspect would be in the cabinet for Hillary Clinton? And I mentioned one of those just a minute ago. In his tweet, he said, Trey Gowdy for Attorney General under President Trump. Now, he may have just been doing that to have a little bit of fun with Hillary Clinton, or he may be serious. And I suspect he may indeed be serious, because that's been mentioned more than once. Trey Gowdy, if you're not familiar, is a representative in the House of Representatives from the 4th District in South Carolina, graduate of Baylor, and then went on to get his law degree from the University of South Carolina, and has been a very tough investigator, prosecutor, both when he was a prosecutor and even sometimes when he is in Congress. So it would be interesting. And of course, if indeed Donald Trump wins the election, he has said that he would put New Jersey Governor Chris Christie in charge of the transition team. Now, when you start looking at who might be on that team, there are some interesting speculations. One, of course, came out with the issue of Rudy Giuliani. Would he be the Secretary of Homeland Security? Just 2 days ago, actually it was just yesterday now that I look at that, that's when he said on a particular talk show that he wanted to maybe have Rudy Giuliani head up a commission to examine the problem with undocumented Muslims coming to this country. Now, I think it's kind of intriguing because you might remember when at very first Donald Trump suggested that we should have a temporary shutdown of Muslims coming to the United States. That's where you had Rudy Giuliani saying, well, no, I disagree with that. He said you can't use religion as a basis for discriminating, and honestly, there's no factual basis on which to assume that the vast majority of Muslims are terrorists. Okay, well, if you have somebody that says, I recognize the problem, but I don't think that's the solution, putting him in charge might be something that could maybe bring about a change. And so whether he's on a commission or whether he's in Homeland Security would certainly be one. I think it is interesting, though, because we're seeing a number of individuals that have said some pretty negative things about Donald Trump who now are actually being considered to be part of his team. Certainly Rudy Giuliani is one of those. Another one is Rick Perry, a former governor of the state of Texas. Jonah Goldberg points out the fact that not so long ago, the former governor of the state of Texas, Rick Perry, said, no one be mistaken. Donald Trump's candidacy is a cancer on conservatism. It must be clearly diagnosed, excised, and discarded. Later on, even said it was a toxic mix of demagoguery, mean-spiritedness, and nonsense that will lead the Republican Party to perdition if pursued. Perdition means basically hell. And so now he's saying, well, now he's opening to be the running mate for Donald Trump, so says Jonah Goldberg, and said, well, I thought you said that this was going to lead us to the tracks to hell. And I think what you are starting to see, interestingly enough, is that a number of these individuals who probably made over-the-top comments before now are saying, well, maybe I was maybe a little extreme. You think? And, of course, now some of them are actually willing to even be considered for a possible place on the ticket. And one of those that has been proposed more than once is the former Texas Governor Rick Perry as the VP. He's one of a small group of people that have been talked about recently. And just before I take a phone call, let me mention one other cabinet idea, and this comes from our friend Cal Thomas. He says, a shadow cabinet for Donald Trump. What he has suggested is since Donald Trump has sort of broken all the rules, why doesn't he break one more and do in the United States what they do in the UK, in the British system, and they have what is known as a shadow cabinet. Now, he says, for those unfamiliar with the term, a British shadow cabinet is made up of a group of senior people from the opposition party who create an alternative cabinet to that of the government. The role of shadow ministers is to criticize government ministers, and if their party wins a majority in a future election, most are frequently appointed to cabinet positions. Now, he says there's some real benefits to that. First of all, each of the appointees presumably would be people with knowledge and experience that Mr. Trump lacks. Second, each of his shadow cabinet members could focus on what they consider the failures of a particular government agency or program and offer alternatives to make it better. And third, some of Mr. Trump's shadow cabinet could recommend doing away with cabinet agencies and programs by making the case that they cost too much and actually fail to live up to their purpose. And so when you start looking at that, that is something very unusual for sure. And the example he uses, if you want it, we can pick many, but one that he has there, which I thought was kind of intriguing, is in the Defense Department, because he says the F-35 fighter jet is just one of the many bad examples, so says Cal Thomas. The airplane has been way behind schedule in development and cost overruns, which have added to the price now around $1 trillion. He says a withering 2015 report by the National Security Network, a D.C.-based think tank, according to Fortune magazine, maintains that the F-35 fighter jet will find itself outmaneuvered, outgunned, out of range, and visible to enemy sensors. I don't think we need that. But it's difficult sometimes within an administration to say it's time to scrap that project, and this is why the idea perhaps even of a shadow cabinet might be something that we've never really done in America. But since Donald Trump is so willing to oftentimes break the rules, maybe that's another one to consider. And so I wanted to mention just a few people that are being talked about to be in the cabinet. Of course, another one, of course, is Dr. Ben Carson as the possible either Surgeon General or the Secretary of Health and Human Services. So let's go back to the phones and give some of you a chance to weigh in with some of your comments. We'll start out in Georgia on the Good News Network. William, thank you for joining us today.
Hey, Kirby, thank you for taking my call. I called in yesterday but didn't quite get on. I just was shocked yesterday at listening to everybody talk about not voting for Trump or Hillary Clinton, knowing that a non-Trump vote is a vote for Hillary Clinton. I'm a pastor, and, of course, I have reservations about Donald Trump, but the Christians not voting is the reason I felt like we were in the mess we're in now for the last 8 years, as you have pointed out so many times. And I would just like to say I would love to have a Cruz or a constitutionalist like Rand Paul, but the people spoke and Trump won, and I think we should all rally behind him. These sound like very good appointees to his cabinet if these are indeed his choices. And I'd just like to encourage Christians to truly vote for Trump because with Hillary, we know what we're getting. And I don't believe we need another 4 or 8 years of what we just went through. Thank you.
Yeah, and when you said Cruz, if you were to see on a list that Donald Trump is going to give out a list, he promises, of the individuals, the pool from which he would select Supreme Court nominees. If you saw the name Ted Cruz on that list, would that help at all?
Oh, sure. I was excited to hear that could possibly be a Supreme Court appointee or something like that. That would be great. I would be very happy with that. I mean, I would rather have someone like that for president, but knowing that he's going to surround himself with possibly some good choices like that, some good conservatives, really, and Dr. Carson and the others, that really means a lot. Really means a lot.
I don't think you ever replace an Antonin Scalia, but the one person that at least might come close is somebody like Ted Cruz. I don't know, but it's again a foregone conclusion that Hillary Clinton would never put Ted Cruz on the Supreme Court. So, and it may be that Donald Trump won't either, but it's just something worth thinking about. So, William, I appreciate you calling, and thank you for being a pastor and ministering to so many people.
Thank you, Kerby.
Let's take another phone call real quickly, and then we'll take some of the other phone calls on the other side of the break. Let's go to Dave in Missouri, KCMH. What would you like to share?
Well, wouldn't the fact that Mexico President Vicente Fox opposes Donald Trump be a good reason to vote for Donald Trump?
Yeah, you sometimes can tell reasons why you want to do something when you can see why people disagree with you, and that certainly would be one of those ideas. Let's take a break, and when we come back, I'll take some more phone calls. Perhaps some of you would like to address this issue of voting for or against Donald Trump, and also let me just mention that if we have time in this first hour, we certainly might get into this issue of transgender activism. Very good piece by Ed Whalen, who, by the way, is somebody that Kelly Shackelford has such high regard for and respect. So when I found this article that actually hasn't come out yet, they released it early before it even came out in the magazine because they think it's so significant. I posted it on the website. And then also what, especially for those of you in North Carolina, I think we still have some North Carolinians that want to call in about that. This is a very interesting piece that was put out by Daniel Horowitz, and it's really about 4 things that your elected representatives in North Carolina could do. So we're going to get into that if we have some time. But let's take some phone calls. 1-800-351-1212. Randy Alcorn will be with me in the second hour today, but for this next half hour, it's your opportunity to call. We'll be right back.
This election has been one of the most divisive in history. Even close friends have been driven apart because they dared support the wrong candidate. Jesus said the world would know his disciples by how they love each other. I'm asking you to do something today as a sign of unity. Step up and support the Truth Team at Point of View Radio so we can be a beacon of truth in 2016 and beyond. America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of View can be a key part of a successful mission. Visit pointofview.net. Make a difference by giving as generously as you can, or call us 800-347-5151. Our next president will likely appoint at least 2 Supreme Court justices, maybe even more. We need each other. And I believe that we need Point of View, and Point of View needs you to invest in the mission. Please join us today, pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151.
Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
I'd like to join our conversation today, 1-800-351-1212. If you just joined us, talking about Donald Trump and, of course, also Hillary Clinton and the campaign. And we're going to get into, in just a few minutes, this issue of transgender activism. Very good piece by Ed Whalen. And most importantly, for those of you listeners in North Carolina, some very concrete suggestions on what your members of Congress could actually do right now in light of some of the things that are being threatened in your state. Love to hear from some of you in just a minute, but let's keep the conversation going for a few more minutes on the campaign. And so we'll head out to Louisiana, KPAE. Ricky, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you, Kerby. I think the wisest business decision Trump could ever made is to appoint Rick Perry vice president, because Trump, number one, is a businessman and he likes to win. I've heard that from everybody. Well, under Governor Perry, Texas produced more jobs in 3-year period than all 50 states combined. I mean, in Trump's eyes, that's got to be phenomenal in anybody's eyes. So not only is Rick Perry the best governor the state of Texas ever had, he's also one of the best businessmen in the whole United States. So Trump, and 2 for 1, is that not only would he pick up a businessman his equal, or probably better, which probably would have been that, but he'd also unify all Cruz's supporters, because everybody that supported Cruz would definitely 100% support Rick Perry and in turn support Trump. So he could unify the party, pick up somebody that did a miraculous thing. In fact, I think the reason why Rick Perry didn't stay in is because he didn't emphasize the fact that he produced more jobs than all 50 states combined. That was sort of, that's miraculous, really.
It is, yeah, 49 states. But let's talk about that for a minute, because when people hear that, they go, well, is that really true? Because a lot of times people say, well, no, he just produced more jobs than any other state. No, if you took the other 49 states and added them up, he actually, in the state of Texas, and you can't say he, but certainly the Texas economy produced 9 states combined. And I did a commentary, Ricky, a while back on this, because I looked into the numbers, because one of the arguments that you sometimes hear, and I saw this in the New York Times, which is what stimulated my commentary, is, well, yeah, that's because they have oil and gas and they have air conditioning. First of all, I thought, what does air conditioning have to do with anything? But okay, oil and gas. And I went back and looked at it. Well, no, that wasn't really much of it at all. And the point is that it is much easier to build a business. It is much easier to grow an economy, to grow a small business in Texas with its light regulatory load compared to other states. And we've talked about before that it's pretty easy to actually rent a U-Haul truck that wants to go from Texas to California, because very few go, but there's a lot of them that come from California to Texas, you know, and all sorts of other issues that are part of that. So if indeed Rick Perry is the nominee, either as a VP or he could be the Secretary of Commerce or a number of other things, that's just another aspect of maybe trying to build and grow businesses in America and to do some things to turn this economy around, since we've had the slowest recovery from this so-called Great Recession that we've had in 75 years. So, Ricky, I appreciate you calling today.
Okay, thank you, Carl.
If you'd like to join the conversation, that opens up a line for you, 1-800-351-1212. But let me not just switch topics, but add one. So if you want to still talk about Donald Trump or Rick Perry or some of these others, of course, we mentioned the possibility of Trey Gowdy as the Attorney General and all the other individuals. Certainly love to hear from you if that would make a difference in whether or not you would or would not vote for Donald Trump in the general election. But let's also get into one other issue that we've been following. I try not to cover it every single day, but this piece by Ed Whalen, very well done. He is the president of the Ethics and Public Policy Center. It is an organization that was started back in the 1980s. As a matter of fact, I used to work with it for a short period of time and was really great when I was at Georgetown University. Nevertheless, he has begun to help us understand what's taking place. And that is, a lot of it has to do with a redefinition of Title IX. We talked about that a little bit with Kelly Shackelford, but Title IX was enacted by Congress in 1972. Now, this was simply a statement that you could not, at college, private or public, discriminate on the basis of sex. Now, everybody knew what sex meant back then. Sex meant boy, girl. It didn't mean gender identity. And there are some very good regulations where it even said one regulation dating from 1975, which gives us the legislative history, says that a school may provide a separate toilet, locker room, and shower facilities on the basis of sex. But it goes on to specify that only such facilities provided for students of one sex shall be comparable to such facilities provided for students of the other sex. It is very clear in the legislative history. It's very clear in the law. That's what it means. Well, now, you have a Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Department of Education saying, no, that's not what it meant. Instead, it actually meant gender identity, as if anybody in the 1970s was talking about transgender anything. And so he makes two comments. First, he declared that the Title IX ban on discrimination on the basis of sex includes a ban on discrimination on the basis of gender identity. But here's the kicker. Number two, he asserts that schools that provide sex-segregated restrooms, locker rooms, shower facilities, housing, athletic teams, and single-sex classes must treat transgender students consistent with their gender identity. Well, Ed Whalen brings us down to this issue and said, well, wait a minute. He says, well, just think about what this might mean. A young man who says his gender identity is female must be offered a college dormitory room with roommates who are women, irrespective of the wishes of those roommates. An athlete who is biologically male in all aspects and respects must be allowed to compete for a position on a woman's sports team if he identifies himself as a female. A first-grade girl who thinks she's a boy can use the boys' bathroom, and yes, high school boys who say they're transgendered girls may use the girls' locker room and showers on the same terms at the same time as the girls do, and vice versa, of course, for girls who say they're transgendered boys. The point I'm making is really simple, and that is you have a lot more at stake here than just a bathroom issue. What you have at stake here are all sorts of remarkable changes, just a lack of even common sense kinds of changes that become unleashed if indeed Title IX is seen as actually not just focusing on biological sex, but on gender identity. And if you think that that's unreasonable and unlikely, let's just go to the state of Virginia, which Ed Whalen talks about there, where you had a panel, a federal appeals court, that ruled 2-1. By the way, the two were Obama appointees who actually ruled in this particular case that a girl who identifies herself as a male has the legal right to use the boys' restrooms in her high school in the county there in Virginia. So we have court precedents, we have edicts coming down from the state, and of course, in just a minute, we'll get into some of the other issues because we, of course, also have what's happening in North Carolina, where they're just simply saying, you know what? It's about time for us to just bring a lot of pressure on North Carolina and actually withhold any kind of funding from the Education Department and have the Justice Department bring a full investigation. So if you'd like to join the conversation today, we'd love to hear from you. 1-800-351-1212. Let's go back to the phones. We'll go to South Carolina. I'm sure I'm going to be hearing from some of you in North Carolina in just a minute. But Ken, you have the floor. What would you like to say?
I want to talk about the economy. I was just driving up I-95 and was listening to your station.
Well, that would be great. And I think you want to talk about the issue of the fact that wages have been stagnant for so long.
All right, about 20 years.
Yes, sir.
Okay, and if you go back to 1995 or 96, during the Clinton administration, you will find by checking with the Bureau of Labor's website under the archive section that the cost of living formula was changed.
Yes.
In order to keep the federal deficit down. And if you go online and you search for economy and CPI calculations, you will find that some recent economists took the old formula, plugged it in with today's numbers, and found that the cost of living index is 40% higher today than it was back during the previous formula. And this has affected most middle-class people. It affects Social Security.
Sure.
It affects people on
every entitlement.
Welfare. Right. But their wages are 40% behind.
That's right.
Now, this does not affect people in the higher echelons of companies. Most of them have employment contracts. So their cost of living index is based differently.
Well, I've got to come to a break, but let me just mention that is something I've written about, and I, again, encourage people to check it out for themselves. But as you go to our website, pointofview.net, you'll see that I've written about that because they fiddled with all of that, and that's why most of you find yourself with stagnant wages. There are a lot of other reasons, not the least of which was a down economy, but the economy was booming in the 1990s. In many ways, for a lot of good reasons, but it didn't show up there. And again, they fiddled with what are called the COLAs, the cost of living allowances, and we paid the price for it. Let's take a break. We'll come back with more right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
I'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Randy Alcorn will be with us in the second hour. Looking forward to that interview. But let me just mention real quickly before I take another phone call that if we look at some of these lawsuits, another one in the state of Illinois, I want to certainly alert some of our Illinois listeners there about the high school, Palatine High School, where 51 families have filed a federal lawsuit. And the reason for that is the Department of Education, the Obama Department of Education, said it was going to pull $6 million from federal funding because the school district would not allow a transgender boy to change in a separate facility rather than in the girls' locker room. The issue began when it was student A. That's what she's listed in the complaint, who was born a male, now identifies as a female, wanted to have access to all of the facilities. And to its credit, we didn't even mention this the other day when Kelly Shackelford and I were talking about this, the school district did allow him, now her, to change now her name, on the school records, allowed student A to go and play on the girls' sports teams, which I think some people raised their eyebrows at, and even allowed student A access to the girls' bathrooms. But when they talked about the showers, that's when the school district drew the line and said, look, we're going to provide you a separate facility down the hall. But that was not enough for student A. And so, of course, a lot of this has to do with whether or not Title IX of the U.S. Code, when it talks about sex, applies to boys and girls or whether it applies to a whole lot more, and that is gender identity. And even if you think that it should, I mean, I know that some listeners say, well, I think we should just allow them to go anywhere they can. Most of our listeners don't think that, but at the very least, that's a decision that Congress should make, not the undersecretary, what is he, the assistant undersecretary or something like that of the Department of Education. And they're wanting to pull $6 million of funds. And, of course, in North Carolina, as most of you are well aware, the Obama Justice Department has threatened to cut off education funding to the entire state of North Carolina because of a bill that was actually passed by the legislature, signed by the governor, following a legislative procedure. And I think that illustrates only so much. And so this is why I thought I might just mention real quickly some of the ideas that were suggested by Daniel Horowitz in his particular piece, where he talks about Congress can stand with North Carolina and gender sanity. 4 points real quickly, and I'll take some phone calls. First of all, to assemble the entire North Carolina delegation and repudiate the repugnant statement from the Obama administration comparing civil rights to transgendered actions. Number two, to insert a provision in the upcoming Commerce, Justice, Science Appropriations Bill defunding any Department of Justice lawsuit or punitive action against states that is predicated upon enshrining transgenderism into Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. And then also to pass a concurrent resolution in the House and Senate nullifying the Department of Education's memo using Title IX of the United States Education Amendments of 1972 to promote the transgender agenda. And then finally, number four, to clarify Title II and Title VII of the Civil Rights Act once and for all as only relating to racial discrimination as clearly intended by those who drafted and passed the legislation in 1964. So for some of you that are in North Carolina say, what can we do? Actually, there are some pretty good marching orders, and maybe we'll even provide an opportunity for you to express some of those ideas to your elected representatives. Let's go back to the phones and take as many phone calls as we can here. In Texas, Tony, thank you for calling today.
Yes, hi, thank you. I just have a comment about my experience with my son and daughter. I raised two, and my daughter was very dominating as a child, and she grew up to be a dominating type of person. And my son was the opposite, very tender-hearted. Well, when my daughter had her 5 children, she raised her children, her girls, to be tomboyish, and they grew up tomboyish. And then, I believe that caused the confusion. So now one of my granddaughters claims to be a homosexual, person. And I thought, my goodness, how could that be? We're Christians here. You guys are supposed to follow the word of God, But you see, my granddaughter was so desperate to get her mother's approval. And I believe that's why she became, more of a dominating type of person. It's the approval that those babies are dying to get from their parents, their love and attention. And when the mother and the fathers don't give them that attention that they need, they go elsewhere. They're looking for love. Sure. I believe they're desperately longing for the love of God, and I sit there and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, Lord, how could that have happened? But I believe it's a spirit of confusion in all the homosexuals. I mean, God loves every single one of us. He died for those homosexuals. And God loves us unconditionally, but we have to share the love of Christ to the homosexual agendas and tell them, God loves you and we love you too, because I think there's 7 deadly things that God hates the worst. And one of the top one is not homosexual. It's a pride, a life, and innocent, shedding innocent blood. So the homosexual is not the main, I guess you can say, the ultimate sin. I believe that it's a part of life.
Yeah, and one of the things I might mention real quickly, Tony, it may not be of help to you, but it might to other listeners out there, is we did an interview a while back and have done a number of interviews over the years with Dr. Joseph Nicolosi, and he's written a book called A Parent's Guide to Preventing Homosexuality. You know, ever since we had this political vote that said, well, homosexuality is not a treatable disorder or treatable issue, then you just have to affirm people. And yet he's continued doing some of this research. Of course, it's been very controversial and all the rest. But if you find yourself seeing some of those tendencies in your own family, let me just mention his book, A Parent's Guide to Preventing Homosexuality. You could even go to our website and hear the interview that we did with him, because, as you point out, there are a lot of times people say it's nature. I was just born that way. Well, I think your illustration there is a lot of times it's nurture. It's the environment. And I did want to give just a few more of you a chance to join the conversation before we have Randy Alcorn in the next hour. So let's head out to Arizona. Trina, thank you for joining us today.
Yes, I get the feeling that, especially here in Arizona, where you have the opportunity to carry a handgun or whatnot, that if people have children going into the bathroom, that it could cause a lot of issues and maybe even somebody losing their life over it.
Well, let's hope and pray that that never happens. But again, one of the reasons we talk about some of this is people say, well, I haven't seen any problems with allowing transgenders to go into bathrooms. Well, first of all, that's not the issue. 0.3% are not the concern we have here. There may not be one example of that in terms of using that in a malicious way, but there are lots of examples of individuals, and we'll just use women for a minute. I've seen some statistics say 1 out of 6, others say 1 out of 3 that have been molested. But again, you look at the percentage of those who actually were molested or propositioned or in one way sexually assaulted in public areas, you can begin to see why we should pay attention to that. And so again, don't you know that if something happened to a particular guy's daughter in a restroom and he found out about it, I'm sure that there would be some repercussions, and we would hope and pray that it would not be. And this is just why this whole idea is insane. And so if you want to get a little more of a legal perspective on this, the piece that we've posted today by Ed Whalen, Transgender Activism has Produced a Legal Absurdity. It's about 8 pages long, so it'll take a little while to read, but it might be something that you would want to read and then pass on to a legislator or a school official who hadn't really thought through this and would like to get something that is written in popular language, but certainly has a lot of legal opinion behind it. We're going to take a break, and for those of you that weren't able to get through today, of course, there's always tomorrow. The second hour today, though, we really want to focus on this new book by Randy Alcorn on happiness. Fascinating book, and I'm sure it will cause a lot of you to go back to the scriptures and reevaluate how you've read some of these passages. Randy Alcorn will be with us. All that coming up right after these messages.
Does point of view make any difference? I think Dr. Eric Walsh would say it does. Dr. Walsh was fired from his job as district health director for the state of Georgia, not because of anything he did or failed to do on the job, but because of sermons he preached in his local church. What does that have to do with point of view? Jeremy Dice of First Liberty is representing Dr. Walsh in his effort to correct this apparent injustice. And Jeremy Dice became an attorney specializing in defending religious liberty greatly because of what he learned listening to Point of View Radio as a child. That is the kind of difference you make when you support the Truth Team, but we can't make that difference without your help. Become a partner today in this important mission of speaking the truth in love. Click on Join the Truth Team at pointofview.net. Choose your giving level, stretch a bit. Please do it today. Pointofview.net. or call 800-347-5151. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151.
Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View.
And now, Kerby Anderson.
This hour we're going to talk about happy, and we're going to answer all sorts of questions. And is it okay to be happy? Aren't we supposed to be wholly not happy? Doesn't the Bible talk more about joy than it does about happiness? And you know, what about some of these Bible translations that changed words like blessed to happy? Is that appropriate? And is God happy? That almost sounds blasphemous when you think about it. And how does sin and guilt affect happiness and maybe even kill happiness? And can things like parties and feasting be associated with happiness? These are just a few of the issues we're going to be talking about today in the book by Randy Alcorn called Happiness. There's also a smaller booklet called God's Promises on Happiness, and they're published by Tyndale. We have lots of information about it on the website. And I might just mention that we also have a link to Eternal Perspective Ministries, and he actually started that back in 1990 after being a pastor for more than 14 years, has a bachelor's of theology and a master's of arts in biblical studies from Multnomah University, as well as an honorary doctorate from Western Seminary in Portland, Oregon. Author of over 50 different books, including this one, Happiness, as well as Heaven, The Treasure Principle, Safely at Home, and many others. And they've been translated into over 60 languages. A good friend of this ministry, and Randy Alcorn, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Pleasure to be with you. Kerby, how are you today?
I am good, and it was fun to see you when you were in Dallas a while back and got an autographed copy of the book. And this issue of happiness, some people might say, really? I mean, you write books, but 470 pages on happiness, and you know, even the small booklet on of 90 pages on God's promises about happiness. But you did it in large part because I think we've given up this idea that Christians are supposed to be happy, because we've sort of bought into the idea that we're really supposed to have joy, not happiness. And to talk about God being happy, that doesn't even seem biblical. So help us out here.
Well, I think first let's take that second question about God being happy. Why would we think it would be blasphemous for God to be happy? Well, I think it's because we think, well, no, God is holy. And we've turned holy and happy into opposites.
Yes.
So what we've done is we've imposed upon God in his holiness the concept of utter disapproval that a child feels in church if he's squirming, and a person in the next row over gives this very disapproving look, and that's holiness. And happiness is what the child wants. And yet Jesus, used children as examples of what you must be like to be part of the kingdom of God. And I think that not only natural happiness, but that desire to be happy is clearly God-given. It's not the result of the curse and the fall. I mean, what's the alternative? Why do we want to be happy? And we all do. And that's one of the things that talk about at length in the books, is just to prove it. Throughout history, both secular and spiritual thinkers have all said we desire to be happy. And think about it. Has there ever been a time in your life where, no, I don't really want to be happy? What I'm seeking now is to be unhappy. No one seeks to be unhappy. But what we end up doing then is acting as if it's the devil who wants us to be happy, and that happiness is sin. Well, in fact, of course, we are by nature sinners, so what do? We try to find happiness in the wrong places. And our problem is not that we're seeking happiness. It's that we're not seeking our happiness in God and in the ways He has provided for us to find true happiness.
I might just mention there are 45 chapters in this book, 2 appendices, so obviously we won't cover all of it in an hour, but you did say something in passing that is part of that first section about why we long for happiness. I think if I were to go out with a microphone and talk to people walking up and down the street, most of them, if they were Christians at all, would probably think, well, happiness is something we sought after the fall. In other words, this isn't something that's part of our nature being created in the image of God. We're seeking happiness because now we live in a fallen world. But you actually set that idea aside if we look at it from a biblical point of view.
Yeah, I think it's obvious that if you were to ask, and obviously there would be a language gap, but I mean, if you were able to ask the equivalent of this in whatever language Adam and Eve were speaking in the garden, and ask them, do you want to be happy? It would have been a silly question. Well, yes. Sure. I mean, God has given us this happy place, and the fruit is delicious, and the animals are wonderful, and the water tastes so good. And you say, well, they didn't know anything different, right? They were swimming in a sea of happiness. You know, that's what they lived in. Well, then what happened is Satan tempts them to find their happiness, a greater happiness than God has given them, by violating His commandment to not eat of that particular tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So they succumb to that temptation, and then what happens? What happens is the fall and utter unhappiness that replaced the happiness they had had. And this is what Satan does. In the name of happiness, he offers us these things which will, in fact, rob us of happiness. But an important question here, Kerby, I think, is how could they have been tempted by the offer of happiness outside of God unless inside of God they had been given a desire to be happy? In other words, you can only be tempted toward what you want. And God wired them in such a way to want happiness, and so I think what we do as Christians is we throw out the baby with the bathwater. Well, the baby is happiness, and even the seeking of and the desire for happiness. The bathwater is when we pursue happiness in sin, which ironically is the very place we will not find it. Sin is the killer of happiness, not the grantor of happiness.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, we want to get into this issue of joy and happiness. And I might just mention that, of course, I am actually read through the entire 470-page book, but what we have available right there on our website is a link to the much less expensive and smaller kind of 90-page booklet on God's promise of happiness. But I want to kind of explore that, Randy, with you about this issue of joy and happiness, where somewhere along the line we certainly seem to believe that those were synonyms, and there's been a long history in the church of equating joy with happiness, but somewhere along the line there was opposition to the word happiness in the church, and see if we can recover some of that, and then also get into this idea of blessed and what it means to be blessed, and certainly a lot of other issues that we're going to talk about today. So again, you can go to our website, pointofview.net. You can find some great resources that we are making available to you today. One of those is a link to the Eternal Perspective Ministries, or just go to epm.org. You can get any of Randy Alcorn's books. There's a blog there. There's a way in which you can browse through all sorts of great resources. And so, again, we make that available to you today as we are talking about that. And it's certainly found on our website, pointofview.net. Talking about happiness, talking about joy, and some of the things that we need to understand, many of which we've lost in the contemporary culture. Randy Alcorn has done the research to bring us back to a biblical balance. We'll talk about that with him and then with you right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You may have noticed that some politicians and judges are no longer talking about the freedom of religion. They now promote the lower standard they call the freedom of worship. The difference is significant. Freedom of religion implies the freedom to express your religious values in the marketplace. Freedom of worship implies you only have that freedom inside your church. The case of Dr. Eric Walsh suggests that even the weaker freedom of worship standard is under attack. He holds both a medical degree and a doctorate in public health. He is an outstanding health director that President Obama even appointed to his Presidential Advisory Council on HIV/AIDS. After being interviewed by the state of Georgia Department of Public Health, he was offered the position of district health director. Dr. Walsh immediately accepted and made plans to move his family across the country from California to Georgia. But then the Georgia officials decided to check into what he had been teaching at his church. They requested copies of his sermons and searched online for others. The Department of Public Health then decided to rescind the offer that Dr. Walsh had already accepted. Now, it's worth noting that the behavior of the department in reviewing the sermons was so egregious that its own counsel twice warned that under federal law, Dr. Walsh's religious beliefs could play no role in any employment decision. Nevertheless, they withdrew the offer and have marked him as a controversial person. First Liberty attorney Jeremy Dice explains that no one in this country should be fired from their job for something that was said in a church or from a pulpit during a sermon. Fox commentator Todd Starnes warns that what you say from the pulpit on Sunday could get you fired from the public sector job on Monday. This case illustrates that not only is freedom of religion under attack, but even the concept of freedom of worship is under attack. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Privileged to have with us today Randy Alcorn as we talk about his new book, Happiness. And, of course, the booklet is entitled God's Promise of Happiness. And there's a chapter on what's the difference between joy and happiness. And I know, Randy, when you've been talking to people as you were writing the book, they'd say, what are you writing on? Happiness. And they'd all look and say, you mean joy, not happiness. And I imagine, again, if I were to go into a church with a microphone and ask people about happiness, most of them would want to correct me and say, well, happiness is just kind of a transitory feeling. But joy is really what we're supposed to have. That's for all. We see that in the book of Philippians. But perhaps we have made a mistake in the modern church world, because there was a time in which joy and happiness really were seen as synonyms.
Absolutely. One of the interesting things that I did, one of the Bible study tools that I love, you may use it too, but is Logos Bible software.
Yes.
And so there's a feature in that where you can go back, and for instance, I took a collection of the major works of the Puritans that they have, and they have, of course, tens of thousands of pages of what the Puritans actually said. So then I would put in the word happiness and the word joy, and you can indicate where do those words appear within 5, 6, 7, 8, whatever number you give, words of each other. And so I thought, okay, this will be great, because then I'll be able to see how they use these words in near proximity. Are they contrasting them, or what are they doing? And context gives clarity to meaning. So I went through thousands of passages. I mean, it was actually very fun. You get hooked on that research stuff. But anyway, so
that's amazing.
Yeah, and I know you know, because I know what you're like, and you're like me in that regard. You just want to know more. Well, it was fascinating. I could find no use of happiness in a negative way except where there was the use, where there was a specific reference to sinning in the seeking of happiness, and then there were parallel references to people who spend their lives seeking joy outside of God, and who want gladness that is not in God. So, in other words, all of the words are used very positively, including happiness, in relationship to finding them in God, and used very negatively in relationship to trying to find them in sin. And I found Spurgeon's a good example of it, who uses the word happiness, happy and happiness over and over and over again. And he will often say, oh, the joy, oh, the gladness, oh, the happiness that is in Christ. That's the equivalent of what we see in the Psalms, with different Hebrew words for joy, happiness, gladness, merriment, cheerfulness. These are all synonyms. And I think, Kerby, this is one of the things that in the popular Christian mind in most of our churches that people do not understand. You cannot take words that are part of the same, what's called in linguistics, the same semantic domain. These are inherent synonyms. And you can, any Hebrew lexicon, especially the ones that get into semantic domains, always join all the words that are translated, either joy, happiness, gladness, merriment, cheerfulness, any of those words. And they are part of the same family. And so that's why, and that's still true in English. If you look up in any English dictionary, look up happiness, you'll find joy listed, if not first, definitely in the list of attempts to define it. Look up joy and you'll see happiness. Well, that's the way it always was in the church. Through Spurgeon into the late 1800s and the early 1900s, where at a time where people are rejecting God and they're seeking happiness in sin, and obviously there's always been people who seek happiness in sin, but some pastors, one of the most prominent one, Oswald Chambers, and pastors and Bible students and Bible teachers, Oswald Chambers, in My Utmost for His Highest, a great book. I am not speaking down about Oswald Chambers in general or that book in particular, but he made some dramatic statements about how it's an insult to Jesus Christ to even associate him with the term happiness and things like that. Well, what happened was, I think Chambers sincerely, and others as well, started to see all these people who are seeking happiness in sin. So what they did was, instead of redeeming the word happiness and say, no, our happiness is to be found in God, they picked on the word happiness, then started making an artificial distinction between happiness and joy. And because joy is used more in the English translations of the Bible, in particular the King James Version, than happiness, it was like, oh, well, you don't. And then Chambers actually says, nowhere is happiness referred to in the Bible. And yet, you look it up, and in the King James Version that he used, there are, and I list these in the book, 6 New Testament passages where it says, happy are you when you do this, when you honor God in this way, and when you obey God and all that. So even in his own translation that he used, there were commands to be happy, and yet he just said, no, joy is something different than happiness. And we get this all the time, Kerby. People are saying that joy and happiness, I have actual Christian books and online where people are saying joy is the opposite of happiness, which is like saying wet is the opposite of soaked. It's just, no, it's not. They're synonyms, and they have only slightly variant meanings depending on the context in which they're used. But here's the thing. Why does that even matter? Well, here's why it matters. Because when we're preaching in our churches, and this is extremely common, that God calls us to seek holiness, and God calls us to joy, but He does not call us to happiness. The message we are sending to people is that their desire to be happy, which when they go home from church and they watch a ball game or they have a barbecue, they hang out with their friends, they tell stories, they laugh, they do what people do. What they want is to be happy. So now the message we send is, well, if you want happiness, it's out there in the world. But here in the church, we have holiness. And then we have this thing that we say is unemotional, and it's called joy. And if you take the primary word translated joy in the New Testament, chara, and the verb form, chorizo, or whatever it is, those words are often involving strong emotion about the joy that we felt when Epaphroditus, who was almost dead, and God preserved his life, and we rejoiced. And it's like, why are we saying joy doesn't have emotion? And what does it even mean? An unemotional joy, what is that? What would that look like?
Yeah, well, I don't know what it would look like, but just before we take a break, I mean, you can see how this plays out in one of your previous books. I remember one time you sat down, as you talk about in this book, with one of your former professors, and he had a problem with you saying that, we might even ride bikes in heaven. He's like, I can't even imagine, because we couldn't have something that would be bringing us happiness in like riding a bike. So again, it just shows how that kind of dour perspective has affected us. So let's take a break, and when we come back, as we go through this, if you'd like to join the conversation, you can, but this may be one where you just want to sit back and listen. And if you just joined us, we're talking today with Randy Alcorn. His thicker book, which I do commend to you, on happiness, is one that certainly gets into more detail. If nothing else, it has 5 diagrams that really help you understand maybe the relationship that people sometimes have between joy and happiness. But again, we also are having a link to the God's Promise of Happiness, which is a very small booklet, very readable, and certainly one that I would think you would not only want to get a copy of, but get multiple copies and pass around to clarify and maybe even correct some of the errors. But when we come back, Randy, let's, if we can, talk about this idea of blessed, and that you are blessed, and where that came from in the King James, and how that was something very significant, because Randy shares that growing up in an unbelieving home, he never really heard the word blessed, but then later on when he was studying Greek in college, someone said blessed means happy, and he goes, huh? So we're going to get into that as well. If you are interested in some more about this particular topic, or if you'd like to know more about Randy Alcorn, please, if you can, go to our website, pointofview.net. It is connecting you to Eternal Perspective Ministries, or you could just go directly to epm.org. You'll find his books, his blog, and all sorts of other resources there, and we'll talk a little bit more about how you can support that ministry, but also have access to so many great materials that I know you would certainly benefit from. Randy Alcorn with us. We are talking about his book, Happiness. It is published by Tyndale, and we'll come back with more of a conversation with him right after this.
This election has been one of the most divisive in history. Even close friends have been driven apart because they dared support the wrong candidate. Jesus said the world would know his disciples by how they love each other. I'm asking you to do something today as a sign of unity. Step up and support the Truth Team at Point of View Radio so we can be a beacon of truth in 2016 and beyond. America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of View can be a key part of a successful mission. Visit pointofview.net. Make a difference by giving as generously as you can, or call us 800-347-5151. Our next president will likely appoint at least 2 Supreme Court justices, maybe even more. We need each other, and I believe that we need Point of View, and Point of View needs you to invest in the mission. Please join us today, pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151.
Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Continue our conversation today with Randy Alcorn, and again, he's with Eternal Perspective Ministries, and we're talking about his new book, Happiness, and as well the booklet, God's Promise of Happiness. And I might just mention so many of his other books, Money, Possessions, and Eternity, Pro-Life Answers to Pro-Choice Arguments, as well as books dealing with heaven and the treasure principle and Safely Home. Randy, let's, if we can, for just a minute, talk about what's at your website, because you have nonfiction books, you have fiction books, you have children's books, you have study guides, you have audio books and DVDs and a lot of great resources. So as people go to epm.org, what will they find?
Well, a very wide variety. I kind of, as I listened to the introduction to your program, Kerby, it sort of reminded me of anything is kind of fair game to comment on from a Christian worldview, and this is what we do. We respond to people's questions. Certainly we take some excerpts from some of the books that I've written, but we're producing lots of brand new blogs 3 days a week, and sometimes we'll choose a blog that somebody, whether it's on Desiring God or Gospel Coalition or some great site, insight into this, that, or the other thing, so we'll kind of ask people, hey, can we use this, Greg Laurie or someone as a guest blog, and we'll do that periodically, and we just kind of address this wide variety of things. But in terms of Eternal Perspective Ministries and keeping with our name, we really try to focus on bringing an eternal perspective to our present lives. We seek, we look not at the things which are seen, but the things which are unseen. The things which are seen are temporary. The things which are unseen are eternal. So that's where we try to bring that eternal perspective, whether it's to a political issue, certainly to moral issues, and biblical issues and personal walk with Christ issues.
And again, I might just mention he blogs and also is active on Facebook and Twitter. We have some of those links as well. And so certainly a lot of links that you can follow on our website. And then, of course, when you land on his website, you'll find so much more. Okay, how about this question about blessed? I mentioned the fact that when you were taking Greek in college, you said blessed is happy. Oh, I've never heard that before. A lot of that has to do with the King James Bible. It's changed meanings a little bit. So explain.
When the King James was translated in 1611, and when Tyndale and Wycliffe had their translations, prior to that, the English word blessed meant happy. So when they read the original Asher in the Hebrew and the original Makarios in the Greek, it was very natural for them to translate those words as blessed. Now, about a third of the time, the King James Version translates Makarios as happy. And a few times at least, it translates Asher as happy. But usually it's the word blessed, because blessed had kind of that feeling of a God-given happiness. But as recently as 1820, and I say recently, sort of tongue-in-cheek, but when you consider the King James was 1611,
right.
Then you had Noah Webster's dictionary, and I was thinking, how can I prove this premise or thesis that blessed really meant happy, predominantly in the English? Here's no, it's almost funny how often the word happy is used to define blessed. Blessed means happy, happy in this, happy in the word happy again and again. And you look at it and you go, it's not only the predominant meaning of the word, it's a virtual straight across synonym in the early 1800s. Well, the problem is that while the original readers of the King James understood that when Jesus said, blessed are the peacemakers, he was saying the peacemakers are happy. And when Psalm 1 says, blessed is the man who doesn't, seek the counsel of the wicked and all of that, but his delight is in the law of the Lord, they knew that first word of the entire book of Psalms meant happy. So Psalm starts on the note of, you want to be happy? will tell you how. Here it is, happy. And then you get to Psalm 119. You got all the other Psalms where that word Asher is there. But unfortunately now, meaning is buried under a word which in modern English, to most people, including most church people, is not a happiness word. It's actually a holiness word. So if somebody, when you think of, if you hear the word blessed, like some people, our Catholic friends will talk about the Blessed Virgin Mary. Well, when you hear the Blessed Virgin Mary, do you ever suppose for a moment that anyone's talking about how happy Mary was? No.
Of course not.
And so the point is that's just not what it means anymore. Now, I'm all for holiness, and the Bible has many words for holiness, and they're usually translated in ways that make it clear that that's exactly what's being talked about. What I'm opposed to is taking words that relate to happiness and turning them into holiness words. I use an example in a couple of times in the book of Revelation where the Greek words makarios and hagios, which is the normal word for holiness, are used together. And the proper translation would be, happy and holy are those who, and then we would immediately see, oh, they're not opposed to each other, happy and holy. This passage is actually speaking. Instead, what we see in most of our English translations is blessed and holy.
Yes.
Well, then that's like holy and holy. So we've completely missed the meaning. And so this is why, even though I'm a fan of a lot of the most popular English translations, at the same time, this is a time where many of what are often considered the less literal translations, the modern translations, are right on the money when they translate Asher and Macarius the way they do, because they don't feel an obligation to follow the King James Version. Whereas the major U.S. translations, and I'm not even going to name them for fear that it's going to sound like I'm putting them down, but they follow the King James in passages where that are highly memorized passages that people are familiar with, so that, for instance, they're not going to change blessed to happy in the Beatitudes, because it's going to sound like they're changing the meaning. Well, ironically, what we should do is not try to appear to not be changing the meaning. We should appear, or not appear, but actually be trying to convey the actual meaning. And that's why I use a lot of more contemporary translations that I think accurately convey the sense of happiness that's in those words.
Again, going back to the Hebrew, Asher, as well as the Greek word makarios, gives us quite a bit. In the time we have remaining, let's talk about maybe some of the application. You gave one just a minute ago for pastors that are listening, but you also talk about the idea that happiness is our choice, that there are ways to cultivate happiness. And I know this one might be controversial to some, but it shouldn't be. That is the feasts, the festivals, the Sabbaths, all sorts of things like that. Parties really are something that the Bible endorses in terms of happiness, right?
Exactly, Kerby. One of the things that really struck me as I was doing my research in all of the different synonyms, 20-some in Hebrew and about 15 in Greek, that are used in Scripture that are in that happiness semantic domain, was how long these feasts were, how the people walked away from, and some of these were dirt poor farmers and ranchers, and it surely was a sacrifice financially for them to not only spend all the money on special food and banquets and all this kind of stuff. They would have to save that up, but then arguably, at least in some cases, they're then losing money while they're there at these feasts. And you've got one case in the Old Testament where the feast had gone on for a week and the people were so happy, and the singing and the dancing and all of that God-centered, not sin-oriented, but then they decided that this all was so great that they were going to take another week, celebrate for another week. And I thought, okay, in our affluent culture, can you imagine, first of all, can you imagine putting on a week of feasting? I mean, a day of feasting is a stretch.
It is.
But a week of feasting and partying, that's what these were. What do you do at parties? You tell stories, you tell jokes, you laugh, you sing, there's dancing, and this is what the people of God did.
Take a break and continue our conversation with Randy Alcorn right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
I'd like to join a conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Talking today with Randy Alcorn about his book, Happiness, but let's, if we can, along the way, maybe take a phone call or two out in Missouri. Junie, thank you for calling today. You're on with Randy Alcorn.
Yes, thank you for taking my call. I just wanted to say, anybody that wrote a book on heaven like you did has to be happy. I was so happy when I saw the title of that book, because I'm very connected to military families and done a lot of youth group work and women's work with women. And I find one of the biggest crises that I had with them was to convince them that God wanted them to be happy and that he wasn't trying to take away their fun. And yet, at the same time, it's a very theologically looked out upon concept, and I've had a lot of struggles with it. But I wanted to say that it also seemed very significant to me when I was thinking about C.S. Lewis in the Chronicles of Narnia, how much happiness he displayed in the final goals, but even along the way, the wonder. And for me, Narnia has created so much happiness. I have 6 children, and I want to say one of the problems with happiness, I think in our culture, and especially in the Christian culture, we don't find out what God says makes us happy. I love this verse, happy is the man who has his quiver full. And when we were having children, I told my husband, every time I get pregnant, I said, just try to make you happy, honey. So,
there's so much truth.
Yes.
Yeah, so much truth in
yeah.
In
and
what you're.
The word our blessed hope means our happy hope. And happiness for me, now I have 22 grandchildren. We just had 3 born this year, and there are definitely more to come. I just want to say happiness is not in what our Christian world has taken as happiness from the other culture. And I'm not trying to down Christians today, but I just want you to know that I've written a book, and in the book, it's that Kerby, I just sent you a copy. You had told me you were interested in reading it if I ever got published, which I have a traditional publisher. So it only took 7 years, but anyway, in that story, one of the young men says, and he's in another world called Tundra, and he said to the white knight, who is a supernatural figure, he says, you mean there's fun in heaven? Because he's talking about skiing on Blanca Mountain and taking care of the horses and all the fun things you're going to be doing in heaven. And the white knight just laughed, this wonderful laugh, and says, of course there's going to be fun in heaven.
Heaven for sure. Randy, I just about out of time, and I wanted to give you a chance to just react to some of that, because part of this, I guess we could summarize, is that we really do not need to choose between holiness and happiness. You've even got a quote here from John Owen that talks about the first act of divine sovereign pleasure concerning us was choosing of us from all eternity unto holiness and happiness. He puts the two together in that, and as you point out, there is no difference between those two ideas, is there?
No, they're entirely compatible. The only way you will ultimately be happy is to experience holiness, and as you live in holiness, it will automatically produce in your life a true happiness, as long as it's a Christ-centered holiness, not what the Pharisees had, which made them miserable, which was the self-righteous, condemning sort of holiness that was not true holiness. And I think one of the things we have to remember is just as there's false happiness, there's false holiness. And then likewise, people say, well, we don't want to use the word happiness because it's become such an ugly word in our culture because people are always finding happiness and sleeping together outside of marriage and all that. Well, first of all, the question of how much happiness they're really and truly finding is one issue. But the second issue is love is a word, for instance, and there are many of them that has been terribly misused in our culture. But we don't solve that problem by saying, well, we Christians are no longer going to use the word love because it's been abused. You know, let's not do that with happiness either, because happiness is a bridge word to the gospel. Isaiah 52:7 says, it calls the gospel the good news of happiness. That's in the ESV and the NASB, two of the most literal translations, the good news of happiness. And the promise of happiness in Christ, the promise of happiness in the gospel, is something that Satan really wants to undermine. And so he gets these false distinctions between happiness and joy, and you're wrong if you want to be happy. And what that does is it distances the gospel from people, because they go, well, if the church and the gospel don't offer me happiness, I guess I'll have to go somewhere else to find it. And I'm afraid that's what many of our children growing up in evangelical churches, that's the message they're getting. I got to go out into the world to find happiness. Well, the world is great at advertising happiness and, you know, putting the bait on the hook. But then what happens is it doesn't bring the happiness and fulfillment. That is ours in Christ.
Let's, just before I let you go, talk about the fact that there is the 470-page book and then also the 90-page booklet. How would you recommend people use this? Because whether we're talking to pastors or maybe Bible teachers or parents or other individuals, there are all sorts of ways in which people can use some of those resources, true?
Right. I often write big books to begin with and then immediately write small books and medium-sized books. And that's what I did with my Heaven book and my book on the problem of evil and suffering, If God is Good, my book Money, Possessions, and Eternity. Then I came out with the Treasure Principle, which is a small takeoff on it. Because what I find is that some people like reading the shorter stuff, but there are other people who really want to get into it, especially when it's either a controversial subject or a very biblically important subject. They have unanswered questions, and I want to answer those questions, which you can't in the smaller book, but you can in the larger book. So I would say for anyone who wants a thorough understanding of what the Bible says about happiness and the happiness-related words that include joy and gladness and all the others, then the big happiness book is the one for them. If they want to know what has been said throughout church history about this and they want more detail, that's the book. If they want something that they can read in an hour and a half, they can take that smaller, booklet, the God's Promise of Happiness, but they can still get a lot of what the essence and some of the important things and the bottom line message of the book. But I think what some people will do is after they read the smaller book, they'll say, wow, I have a lot of unanswered questions and this intrigues me. So then that would be, I'll pass this along to somebody else and then I'll read the bigger book.
Very good. They are both published by Tyndale. We have information about that. And, of course, a link to Eternal Perspectives Ministries. And Randy Alcorn, we so value the insight that you have given to us on so many different topics. And thank you once again for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you, Kerby. It was great to be with you.
Once again, if you would like a little more information, we have that on our website, pointofview.net. Or, of course, you can go to epm.org. That stands for Eternal Perspective Ministries. And if you just joined us and hadn't had a chance to hear the entire interview, let me encourage you to go back and actually listen to it. We have that available on our website, pointofview.net. If you, we just mentioned a minute ago, would like to understand a little bit more about this issue of happiness, how we certainly have, I think, taken a very wrong turn in the last century or so and really do not understand what the scriptures teach about happiness. This thick book is certainly one that I would commend to you. It's the one that I bought, and also got Randy to sign. But if you are looking for maybe just something to get the conversation started, the smaller book, it's 90 pages in a booklet form, so it really is very easy read. It has sort of a question-answer format, God's Promise of Happiness. And so, again, some great resources for you to find on his website, and of course we have them linked on our website as well. Just before I run out of time, let me mention that we have posted my Viewpoints commentary. We always, of course, have some take action items, some video, and if you'd like to join with us and support this ministry so that you can hear these kinds of programs, I would really encourage you to go to our website, pointofview.net. Click on that button that says donate. Your one-time gift or your monthly gift would be greatly appreciated. I want to thank Andrew, Catherine, and Shamila for their help behind the scenes. Have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow.
Does Point of View make any difference? I think Dr. Eric Walsh would say it does. Dr. Walsh was fired from his job as District Health Director for the state of Georgia, not because of anything he did or failed to do on the job, but because of sermons he preached in his local church. What does that have to do with Point of View? Jeremy Dice of First Liberty is representing Dr. Walsh in his effort to correct this apparent injustice. And Jeremy Dice became an attorney specializing in defending religious liberty greatly because of what he learned listening to Point of View radio as a child. That is the kind of difference you make when you support the Truth Team, but we can't make that difference without your help. Become a partner today in this important mission of speaking the truth in love. Click on Join the Truth Team at pointofview.net. Choose your giving level, stretch a bit. Please do it today. Pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.